Marion, you can go ahead and unmute now, please.
Mm-hmm.
And welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're really happy to be back with you, those of you special people who are in the TOT, and really looking forward to working with you next week and onwards. So I'm just learning how to move the slides in this new layout. So we're going to go ahead and here's what's going to happen today in the next 53 minutes is I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the plan is for this project in the TOT agenda so that you know what to expect next week. And then Beth is going to talk about the logistics of how the training that you're going to do is actually going to happen. I'm going to just mention some online courses that we will have up fairly soon, and then we're going to talk about standards and some trainer tips. Your assignment for next week is very minimal. It involves thinking, not reading or writing, so don't worry about that. So that's our agenda for today. Why do we have this project? You probably have had some communication with Beth and TCOL about this, but they decided that they needed more trainers to do more training on the content standards, and so those trainers are going to be you, and that's what we're working on for the next week or two. So we have a 1.5 day training next week. It's 8 to 4 on Friday and 8 to noon on Saturday. I think you've gotten all this information about where and when in email. I have a bullet there that says lunch on our own, but we're rethinking that, so that may or may not be the case. But either way, you're going to get lunch one way or another. Okay, so this is actually the agenda for the TOT, just so you can see what it's going to look like. We're going to talk a little bit about facilitation skills, and we're going to do that today also. I don't know all of you well enough to know how much experience you have presenting and how comfortable you are as a presenter, so we'll address some of those kind of things, but then the most of it is going to be training you on these 2-3 hour workshops on content standards that will be what you will be available to offer to your colleagues. So session 1 and session 2 are those sessions. So after facilitation skills, we'll just go ahead and go through session 1. It's very similar to what you've been through as coaches, but session 1 is basically taking that 2 days that we did last August and condensing it down into 3 hours. So it's an introduction to the content standards, getting familiar with them, unpacking the standards, relating a standard to a lesson plan. That's session 1. Then we'll talk a little bit more about facilitation, because for each of these sessions, after we go through the session with you being participants, we'll have you choose a section. There'll be 4 different sections, and you'll just choose like these 8 slides, and then we'll break up into smaller groups of probably 4 or 5, and you'll each have a chance to lead a section of that session. So you'll get some practice, you'll get some support and feedback from your colleagues and from us. So that will be, there's preparing for the demonstrations, and then we'll have lunch, and then we'll break up to do those demonstrations, then come back together and talk about how that went, and if you have any questions about any of the parts that you presented. And then we'll just begin session 2 on that first day, on that Friday. We won't get all the way through it. So here's day 2. When we come back on Saturday, we'll try to remember what we did the day before with the first part of session 2, and then we'll finish up session 2. Then you'll have a little bit of time to prep for your demo of session 2, and then we'll break up and do those demos again. So you'll be with a different group of people. You get to work with each other, and you'll be with 2 different groups of people, one on the first day and one on the second day. And then we'll have a little bit of time for planning, answering questions, thinking about what's going to happen in the future, and that'll be it. So if you have any questions about that, just go back to the chat pod and see. I don't see anything right there. So Beth or Anne-Marie, just interrupt me if there's questions that I don't see. But that gives you an idea what to expect. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it, or Anne-Marie, you can take it back and give it to Beth to talk about the logistics.
I don't need the presenter rights to do that. I can just talk.
Okay.
Okay, so how many of you have ever done presentations for Train PD before? Can you raise your hand? Okay, I can't see the hand since I'm not presenter.
7.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to, so some of you are familiar with our process, but I just wanted to kind of go over what is this going to look like after the TOT is over. So what will happen is these 2 3-hour sessions will be placed in the PD portal so that program PD coordinators can see these titles and go, oh, I want that. Once we place it in the PD portal, you as the participants who have gone through the TOT will be the associated trainers to those 2 3-hour sessions. So if a PD coordinator sees unpacking the standards and wants Claudette's session, then they make that request through the Train PD specialist. The other thing that will happen is you will be added to the trainer community of practice. So within the PD portal, we have a community of practice just for all of the Train PD trainers. And that's where you're going to find any forms that you need, the copy order request, the W-9, all of those kinds of things that you need available to you should you decide to accept an appointment to go out and do a training at a local program. As I mentioned, they do the request through the PD specialist. So if somebody requests this training, you'll probably get an email or a phone call from one of our PD specialists here at Train PD asking if you're interested, if you're available at that time. And so you would work out and negotiate that with the PD specialist. You know, I had a couple of people ask me, well, how many times am I going to be able to train it during the year? And that's really hard to know. My hope is that these trainings will be popular and that people will want to get new teachers up to speed about the content standards, but the number of times you'll train is really going to be based on the number of requests we get and your availability to train. So the other thing that will happen after the TOT is that we will place the training materials in the PD portal. And here's why we do that. So throughout the course of the year, after we've gone out and trained on these materials a couple of times, it may be that we decide we want to update a couple of things, or maybe this activity isn't working real well, let's update it. So anytime you go out to train, you're going to go to the PD portal to get the most up-to-date set of materials. Kind of what I had for kind of logistics. Do you guys have some specific questions about how this is going to work moving forward after the TOT? You'll have, I'll keep an eye on the chat pod. You'll obviously have an opportunity. I'll be there next week. You'll have an opportunity to ask me if you have some specific questions that you can't think of right now, but you might have later. Happy to do that. So I will turn it back over to Marion.
Thanks, Beth. So hopefully you'll have a lot of requests and you'll be busy. So I just wanted to mention some online courses that will be posted, and this slide is a little bit misleading because actually all of them are coming soon. So these are makeup courses for coaches that missed some of the sessions. So if you missed November or February or one of them, you can make that up by doing the online course. Some of them also will be appropriate courses for new teacher orientation. So the first one on content standards, the overview of the standards and unpacking, similar, that's the August training, and it's what session 1 of what you'll be learning next week is based on. That will be available for anyone to sign up for. And then also coming soon will be courses. One will be backwards design and lesson planning, which we did what we did in November, objectives and assessment, and coaching and feedback, part of what we did in February. So those will be online with slides and narration and quizzes and some interactiveness. So I just want to make you aware of those. So you can recommend these to teachers who come to your training and want more, or teachers who can't make it to the training and want to know what's going on. That this is another way for them to access that information. Your program can recommend these to teachers, and I think I said all that before, and they'll be in the portal. So I'll just keep going, but if you have any questions, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Okay, so just as I was thinking about, what should we talk about today as we get ready to do this training? And I kind of stepped back from the nitty-gritty of unpacking standards and skills, content and context and all that stuff, and thought about what are we really doing here with content standards? And you're going to hear more about this in next week, but just to introduce to you kind of the big view of content standards, there's 4 things: access, consistency, rigor, and equity. And I'm just going to talk about each of them a little bit and get your thoughts about them. So just reading this quote from Arne Duncan, A Flash from the Past, back in 2009. Just take a minute and tell me in the chat what your reaction to this quote is. Is he right? Is he wrong? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What thoughts do you have about basically teaching as a daily fight for social justice? What is he talking about? Leveling the playing field for all learners. Thank you, Beth. That was also my response, and that's a lot of why we exist, is to level the playing field for people that didn't have as much access to basic skills as others. Like Janet, thank you. Students need access to good education. All students, all people. And we're very lucky to live in a country where we do have access for everyone to education. It can be limited, though, by many factors. It can be limited by low funding, by not enough teachers around, no classrooms or books, hunger even, distance to school, cost of education. And when I was teaching ESL, my students used to remind me, those who came from countries where there wasn't free public education, that we were so lucky to have the access to education, and especially adult education. So I always try to keep that in mind. And standards increase access in a way by ensuring that students attending school all have access to the same curriculum and the same high goals. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, you should have just as much access to high quality education as you live in a more affluent neighborhood. This is difficult to achieve. I wouldn't say we're there, but I think it's what we're striving towards. Angela, thank you. So content standards contribute to that access because it ensures that we're all teaching the same things at the same levels. So we're not, raising it up in some places and dumbing it down in others. I'm going to go on to the next one, which is consistency. So this is a study about third graders that found that 25% of inner city third graders have attended 3 or more schools since the first grade. And we know that they weren't moving by themselves. They were moving with their parents, so adults are moving around that much too. Independence is important for teachers. No one teacher is the same as any other, and education takes place just as much in the relationship that you have with your student, or between the student and teacher, as it does between the student and the book or the website or the curriculum or whatever it is they're using. But, as we said before, there's a benefit to consistency. If you have a child in the 3rd grade and you move to a new town, you expect that they're going to be basically learning the same things in the new 3rd grade that they were learning in the old 3rd grade. In adult education, we haven't really been as bound by that as K-12 has. And I can tell you, when I started teaching, there was basically no oversight of the content of what I was teaching in my classroom. I could have been doing anything in there. I could have been teaching the horoscope every day, or having them read that. So that made for a lot of creativity, but not a lot of consistency. There were some good things about it, and there was a downside. it wasn't necessarily connected to my students' goals. I probably didn't even have as much of a focus as I needed to on what my individual students' goals were. So there's a place for consistency, and content standards are playing a role in bringing that consistency. Here's rigor, a word that you've been hearing a lot about probably. Thank you, yes. So just take a minute and just tell me in the chat, when you hear the term increasing rigor, what does that mean to you? You don't have to have like well-developed thoughts that you want to publish in a paper. Just tell me what's your initial response to that phrase, increasing rigor. Gradually increasing the level, making things more challenging. The higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, right? At all levels, even at the beginning levels. You're so right about that. Increasing the level of difficulty. Judy, more adaptability in the job market. That's right. It has really concrete, real-world consequences. Relevance to this day and age in industry and technology. Thank you. So I agree with all of those. You know, if you've been around a long time like me, you see all these white hairs. You know how long I've been teaching or in the field of adult education. We've seen a lot of educational approaches come and go. Some didn't last because the results didn't bear out that we should sustain them. Some of them just didn't have political staying power. But the idea of increasing rigor in instruction is really aimed at increasing the capacity for adults to succeed beyond basic skills education. And I'm excited about that. I definitely feel very positive about that because I think for a long time we were just focused on achieving the most basic of skills. Like if you can talk to your child's teacher and if you can go buy stamps at the post office, you're good. And now we're looking far beyond that to family-sustaining wages and middle-skilled jobs and continued education, and that's where we are now. And I think that's really important. So rigor is an important part of that. The last one is equity. I love this quote from Kennedy because we don't all have the same talents, and it's not about having the same talents. It's about having the same access to developing the talents that we do have. So there's a lot of focus on the content standards now because it takes a lot of effort to get something new into the hands and minds of all of our teachers. And so you all are participating in that effort and have been for the last at least a year, if not more, if not many more. Standards give us a framework for what our students need to learn, but it's our job to find creative ways to help all students find their place and encourage them in whatever direction they want to go in. So that's about equity, that we're not tracking students, we're not putting these people on one track and these people on another, but we're trying to find creative ways to teach everyone in the way that works for them. So the standard isn't, well, I'm going to get to that in a minute, so I will just go on from there. These are the four things: access, consistency, equity, and rigor. Now, what do we not want to be saying about content standards? Or maybe another way to say this is, what kind of pushback are you getting or can you anticipate getting about implementing standards? Standards are not a recipe, so they're not at all. Well, I'm just going to read this because this is a long one. Learning standards describe educational objectives, i.e. what students should have learned by the end of a course, a grade level or a grade span, but they do not describe any particular teaching practice, curriculum, or assessment method. So it's not the recipe for how to teach. There is no how in the standards. It's all about what. By the end of our course, we want our students to be able to do these things that are listed in the standards. But how we get there and how we get that for each individual student is different. And so that's where all the creativity still comes from, and we don't want teachers to feel kind of overwhelmed or stifled by this process. We're not trying to curtail any creativity. We're just trying to bring consistency and rigor and equity to the process. We need to have a different frame of thought about the content standards. Thanks, Olga. Yes, people are looking at it more as work added to what they already have to do. It's true, and it's hard to combat that, but I think, but one thing you can say about every teacher in adult education is they want the very best for their students. So if it seems clear that this is going to contribute to that, people are much more willing to participate in it than if it just seems like, one more thing I have to do. Thanks, everyone. As I've said before, these are not cookie cutters. They're not telling people how to teach anything. There's plenty of choice still available. It's just what the end goal is what the standard provides. So that's my big overview push for how to answer those kind of big questions about why do we have to do this. It is important, and I want to arm you with some information and some responses to some of the resistance that you might encounter. Okay, so things that we don't want to say about standards. So one thing that sometimes people start thinking is like, oh my gosh, look at this big fat list of standards and I have to cover all of this by June. That's not going to happen. No, that's not what we mean here. One of the shifts in the college and career readiness standards is to focus on what's important and not try to teach everything. So we're trying to get away from that mile wide and inch deep approach to education and go deeper on the things that really matter. Do a deep dive into content and concepts. So you have to have a manageable amount of curriculum to be able to do that. And it's of course going to be, you're going to have to adjust based on who you have in your class at any given time. Some classes, some go slower, some go faster, some take a lot of detours, and some are very goal-focused. And you need to have the ability to adjust as you go along. So it's not like we have to do all of these things, but we have to do some of them, or we have to at least have this as our framework for what we're doing. Another thing that happens sometimes is we focus on one standard or one area. It's easy to get absorbed in one thing and lose sight of the big picture. For example, there might be a lot of focus on informational texts because we used to be reading just a lot of kind of general fiction and narrative, and now there's a lot more focus on informational text. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing we can do, or we have to always do that and we're never going to look at a poem or a story again. Or we might focus heavily on text-dependent questions and getting our students to find the answer in what they read, as opposed to just asking them, what's your opinion about this or that? But doing that, sometimes we lose sight of higher level questioning. And who was saying that before? Was it Judy, about Bloom's taxonomy and getting to the higher levels of critical thinking? And we don't want to lose any of that analysis, judgment, or creativity. So can you think of any other examples of where the focus might get too narrowed? I gave you two examples. One was about informational text and one was about text-dependent questions. I guess those are kind of similar, just really focusing on the text. In your experience, have you had any feeling like, oh, we got these new standards and now everybody's focusing on what would that blah, blah, blah be? I don't have to order everything that's on the menu, Wayne. Really? Oh, no. Yes, you're right. Any other thoughts about how, if you've had a sense that the standards are sometimes narrowing our focus? More rigor doesn't mean more homework or more handouts. Thank you, Mike. Yes, that's right. It means what we're actually doing in our classroom. Doesn't mean to do a whole bunch more work for our students or for us, although it might mean some. In all honesty, it might mean some more work. Keep thinking about that one, and if you have, and the other thing is, okay, I have this book. This book is based on the standards, so I'm just going to stick with my book, and I'm going to do everything in this book. So that's one approach. It may or may not allow for a lot of creativity. Some teachers like that. Some teachers don't want to be in that situation, and standards certainly don't require you to just use one book and cover everything in that book. Teachers want to include technology-based tasks, maybe project-based learning, maybe additional writing tasks, and all of those are important. So we're not we're not narrowing the scope. We're just focusing. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some framework for talking about kind of the big picture. Why is that important? Because you are a leader. You are an instructional leader in your state, and you're going to be taking this message out to the teachers. And so it's important for you to be able to talk, to be able to put it in a context that not only makes sense for people, but is exciting and makes them feel like it's important. Our mission is really important. We're making a huge difference in people's lives, and that this process is part of it. So any other thoughts about, or any other concerns you have about pushback you might be getting about the standards that we haven't talked about? Okay, I'm right on time, amazingly. Okay, we're going to then shift gears now and just talk a little bit about being a trainer. And it looked from the number of you that raised your hands like you're a pretty experienced group. So if you are very experienced and very comfortable and not at all worried about doing any of this training, then just bear with me and be a good and calming influence on your colleagues who might not be feeling that way. And share your wisdom and experience with all of us. So we're just going to go through a few things. We'll have a few more of them in the training, but we'll start today. So this is one. What if I look nervous? Do any of you, does anybody have that concern? Like, I'm going to be standing up there and I'm going to feel so nervous and people are going to see that I'm nervous. Everybody's totally comfortable. Okay, awesome. Well, just in case, here's some things about that. Some thoughts about that. First of all, 90% of most physical symptoms of nervousness never show. So my palms might be totally sweating, but you can't see that from, 2 rows away, or you can't see that without me touching you. So, those kind of things, the feeling is intense, but it's not that observable. So you don't have to worry about that. When I get to the point that I don't get a little nervous, it will be time to move on to something else. That's so true. My worst presentations were when I didn't get nervous. I wasn't worried enough, so I didn't prepare enough. Those were bad. The ones when I was nervous and I really prepared and practiced, those were much better. So stretching and shaking out can help. Or I don't know, did you ever watch that TED Talk about the power poses? Like before a big job interview, you're supposed to go in the restroom and stand with your feet wide apart and your arms outstretched and just feel all your power, and that makes a huge difference. So yes, Olga, you know about those power poses. Yeah, so things like that, little things like that can really make a difference for you. And breathing. Breathing is always a good thing. And breathing more deeply gives you more oxygen and helps you calm down. So that's a good one. I think we talked about that. Nervousness is a good thing. Just looking to see if there was something else I wanted to say here. Nope. So what are your thoughts? What tricks do you have about dealing with nervousness? Humor. Breathing, Krista. Thank you. Yeah, humor is good. Chocolate. Self-deprecating humor is always good. Like, yeah, I really don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Okay, here's another one. What if you go blank? This, for you younger people, that's Krista, yes, most people are kind, and it's best to just be yourself and say what's going on. People have compassion for you. Now, did you ever go blank? Did you ever stop in the middle of a sentence and go, what was I talking about? That might be a thing that older people have an issue with, but sometimes it happens to everyone. You're just going along and you can't remember what the heck you were talking about. And it's not a big thing in a small conversation, but if you're in a room in front of 100 people, it feels a little bit bigger. Visualization, Angela, thank you. So here's one thing. We're going to do a lot of the prep for you, but not all of it. You still have to master the material and practice, but we're going to give you a script for every slide, But you might want to make your own version of that that's briefer and just has bullets so that you can look down quickly and remember what you want to talk about. Practice, there's no substitute for practice. And speaking from your own experience and talking about the key concepts, there's going to be parts of the content that you feel really comfortable with and parts that you don't feel so comfortable. So just really practice those parts that you don't feel as comfortable with, and ask somebody for help. Practice. I know I actually hire a lot of people to do training here in California, and I've been amazed at the people who are really good. They do practice, even though they've been doing this a long time. When we give them new content, they're like, okay, I'm going to do this in front of my kids, and I'm going to time it and make sure how the timing goes. And I have a lot of respect for that because I think it really makes a difference. Take notes with you even if you don't use them. It's just like a security blanket, right? Like I always say, like Dumbo and his feather. When he holds onto that feather, he knows he can fly. And actually, the feather wasn't making him fly, but it was giving him the confidence to fly. Yes, keep your notes handy. Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, and as somebody just said before, be yourself. People have compassion for you. Sometimes you just have to say, and I think I've done this with you guys. I think you probably have walked me through this before. It's like, I totally forgot what I was saying now. What was I talking about? And people will help you because they're not nervous and they actually remember what you were talking about. Knowing that you're prepared really builds your confidence. That's so true. Anything that we haven't mentioned about dealing with when you go blank? It seems to happen so much more when you're nervous than when you're not nervous. Like when I'm not nervous, I'm perfectly capable of carrying on a conversation, but when I'm nervous, it's just like every sentence is like, oh, what am I talking about? What am I talking about? Okay. What if you're not making sense? Now, this is another issue. It's like sometimes you're just talking and you get into the rhythm of talking and you kind of lose where you are and you forget where you were going and you lost your focus or your frame of reference or your relationship to your topic. So what do we do in that situation? Planning is a key, and you're going to be going out there with a good plan that we've created for you, but you have to really internalize that plan. It's hard to take someone else's material and train on that material, I think. It's in a way easier to develop it yourself. So you're going to have to really get familiar with these materials. You can tell by the looks on their faces when you veered off course. Hopefully that's true. Yes, Glenda, I agree. It takes more practice when it's someone else's stuff. We talked about this already. Rehearse the parts that you're unsure of. Can be just by yourself or in the mirror, but it can be with other people too if you have somebody that's willing to listen. And find out as much as you can about the audience. How many, how experienced are they? What questions do you think they're going to probably have? So that's been really important for me in this project. Like the first training we did was 130 people. That's really a different experience than even 70. And this training is going to be for 15. So those are very different environments to be training in. So we'll be able to be much more informal and have more conversation and give and take because we'll be a smaller group. So you have to really be prepared for the size of the group and also how much experience do they have, how much do they already know. You know, like today, maybe I'm talking to a lot of you who already know this already, but I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and experiences with the rest of us. And refocus, right? Sometimes you have to do that. Be aware of the rabbits. They will lead you astray. Beware of the rabbits. Got it. Okay. Yes, that's right. Going down those bunny trails. I love those bunny trails, but sometimes you only have 3 hours and you have to get through a certain amount of material. The last one is use visuals, props, video, audio. It gives the audience a focal point that's not you. So they're focused not on you and how you're doing, but they're watching the video and thinking about how to analyze that. What did I miss? Okay, I think you were responding as we went along, so I'm going to keep going. What if I don't have credibility? This actually came up in our wrap-up webinars that we were doing in May with some of the trainers. Some of the coaches felt like it was hard for them as younger teachers to coach older teachers because the older teachers, they just felt like they didn't have the credibility. So I love this graphic. So if your audience is looking at you like this, what do you do? Ask you before I go on. Have you ever had that feeling like I'm not going to have credibility in front of this group because I don't have the right experience, or I'm not one of them, or I don't know what I'm talking about? We'll go right. It's hard to establish credibility without seeming like you're bragging about yourself. But you want people to know that you're there for a reason. You're not just picked out of a hat. You know what you're talking about. You've been through this training. You have teaching experience. You have a lot of experience behind you. Glenda, thanks. Relate from the standpoint of sharing what's been shared with you and be confident in that. That's a good point, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're sharing what we're sharing with you, and it's an opportunity for them to get that. And thank you. Yes. I'm probably one of those teachers that's been teaching longer than you've been alive, but your experience counts for a lot also. That's so true. Just sounding confidence, Wayne. Sounding confident really helps. And you are the expert. You guys are going to be the experts on this. Thanks. You feel confident because you're actually using them. And that's an advantage that all of you have because you've been coaches, you've been involved in this process. You've been thinking about this for a year, and your audience probably has not been thinking about this for a year. So that does give you credibility. Sharing experiences that you have while remaining humble. Yes, it's an art, isn't it? Thank you, Wayne. They did invite you, so I guess they want to hear what you have to say. Okay, here I'm going to give you humility. Yes, that's right. Yes, you don't have to know everything. Don't be a know-it-all, and you don't have to know everything. You just know what you know, and you're sharing what you know, and you can take advantage of what other people have to contribute also, which is what I'm trying to do with you right now. Okay, so here's some more things. Make eye contact. So that's part of demonstrating confidence is making eye contact. Show enthusiasm and excitement. I'm sure you feel that or you wouldn't have signed up for this. So just that enthusiasm is catching, even if it's not, even without anything else. Enthusiasm is really generates more enthusiasm, so that's important. Offer facts if you can instead of opinions, and speak from your own experience when you can, which a lot of you can. All of you can, I'm sure. And what else could you do? You already answered that. So we're coming to the end here. So this is what I would like you to think about because we'll have a little discussion about this at the beginning of the TOT. So what are your greatest strengths as a trainer? And really focus on that because, it's really easy to think about what our weaknesses are and what we have to work on and what we're afraid is going to happen. And I know when I read I'll read 50 evaluations, and if there's one negative one in there, I'll forget the other 49, and I'll remember that one for the rest of my life. So that's not exactly balanced, right? You need to be a little balanced and think about your strengths, and then also what concerns you might have about doing this training. Okay, so that's the assignment. Glenda, thank you. Accept that someone is not going to like you and be okay with that. Working on that. Worst evaluation and the best and throw them out. The rest is reality. Oh no, I have to throw out the best one too. Good point, Beth. Okay, so that's it. Do you have any, shoes, okay. Any questions or any concerns or anything that you want to ask before next Friday, now is the time. Well, we're looking forward to being with you. Beth or Anne Marie, anything to add? Casual dress? That's a Beth question.
Oh, sure, yeah. There's no reason to get all gussied up. So, yeah, casual, comfortable dress. Expect an email from me, just double-checking to see if anybody has any dietary restrictions, because I'm working on going ahead and bringing in lunch since we're going to be on Friday, since we're going to have to be preparing for our presentations in the afternoon. Yes, we will. Good. That's a good question, Mike. We will have a binder for you that has the materials for the TOT as well as for both of the sessions. And I'm going to go ahead and save all those materials to a thumb drive for you so that in the evening, if you're preparing a demo or you want to be able to put it in your laptop, you'll have all of the PowerPoints available to you that way. So we will have all that for you. So, Marion, thank you. This was really nicely done, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody next week. So
okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right. See you in a week. Have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. And this is just a quick reminder that you will be able to print your PD certificate in the PD portal by no later than Monday afternoon. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Marion. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.